this computer and we'll go live. So, oh, every time I do that, it screws that up. So I got to switch that back. So let's see, spin, boom. You're live on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy. And those who don't know, I'm Teddy, and my good buddy in the dark shirt and the grandiose smile of my buddy's sidekick, Randy Wooden.
Yep.
Our special guest today is Jon Lowder. Randy, are we heading in the right direction?
I'm working on it right now.
Good stuff. So let me share with you a little bit about who I am before we get into the show. We appreciate all 8,000 people who've showed up so far. I'm Teddy Burriss. I'm a LinkedIn strategist, trainer, and coach, and I help people master the use of LinkedIn as a business tool. I also teach Google Workspace through Burriss Consulting, a lot of online classes, a lot of one-on-one coaching, a lot of corporate training programs all around LinkedIn. But every week, my buddy Randy and I get together and we make a little noise, and we look for some people who are way freaking smarter than us to join us on the show. And let's see, Jon would tell me that I would probably be scraping near the bottom of the barrel for him if he was going to do the satire line. I'm not letting him do, which would purely be satire. But our special guest today is Jon Lowder, and we'll introduce you to him in a minute. Randy, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Randy Wooden with Goodwill Industries, Northwest North Carolina, based out of Winston-Salem, and I run our professional center. A little known secret for a lot of folks. They don't know that Goodwill has a professional center here in the Triad, but we do. So if you're watching, or maybe you know somebody that thinking about new job, new year, that kind of a thing coming up, maybe have them reach out to me and we can get them on the calendar. Services are free, so that's a good thing. And we work with all different industries and functions. So if you're thinking about a job hunt or you're knee deep in it right now, reach out to me. We'll get you on the calendar, like I said. But every week we get together and we don't have to scrape the bottom of the barrel now, Jon. We're not there. No, but really looking forward to our talk today, Jon. You've got a lot of good information about something that's on a lot of people's minds. So let's get to it, Teddy.
Yeah, before we do, let me do my job. And Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy is sponsored by the Elder Law Firm out of Greensboro, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. They're all about helping you help those who are important to you in estate planning, elder care planning, and those 7 freaking documents that you have to have in place before you die or you can't die. So if you're looking for that kind of help, reach out to the Elder Law Firm in Greensboro, North Carolina, 336-396-4551. So I'm up to date, right? I got my tasks done here. Hey, well, Jon and I are going to have a conversation while we're chatting. Mm-hmm. Randy's going to monitor Q&A.
No.
I'm sorry. He's going to monitor chat. He's going to ignore Q&A. So, jump in with any questions you have for Jon or Randy and I. The conversation with Jon today is, I wrote the title this way, Jon. I wrote it with the second option you gave me. Why your kids may still be living with you when they're 40 years old. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jon Lowder from, let me see if I can say it right, the Triad Real Estate and Building Industry Coalition.
That's right.
TREBIC out of Greensboro, North Carolina. Jon, would you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. Jon Lowder. I'm president of TREBIC. Every time I have to say the full name, I bungle it. It's a long name, but
take a breath in the middle.
Yeah, just go right to TREBIC and then confuse people if they ask, I'll try to say it. Happy to bring down the average of your guests. So it should be fun. So what we do at TREBIC is we do a lot of policy work. So our members, we're an association, and our members are land developers, builders, anybody really involved in the land development business. So it could be attorneys, engineers, and the like. We work as a go-between with city and county government in particular, but even at the state level and some federal level, but primarily here in Guilford County, where our offices are in Greensboro. We're getting ready to expand to be Triad-wide to kind of reflect, the name of the organization's been Triad all along, and we just need to kind of start living the name.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. Always ask the why question, John.
Yeah.
Every week guests come on, they're really knowledgeable in their field, but they're also passionate about what they do. And to rise to the level that you have in your field, you've got to have the knowledge, but also the drive and the passion. Was there something that triggered all that for you earlier in life, an event, or just how did you get the drive to do what you do these days?
Without going into the origin story, would bore you to tears, but I grew up in the Northern Virginia area, DC area, and my mother worked in the nonprofit sector, and spent her career there, and so I was kind of exposed to that from an early age, and worked in with various industries in the nonprofit sector. And then I went to when we moved to North Carolina, at the time I was consulting with some nonprofits doing things like trade shows and membership development and that kind of thing. And right around 2008, 2009, I had kids that were getting ready to go to high school, and I started thinking about college. I was like, consulting's cool, but I might need something a little more stable. And a job at the Piedmont Triad Apartment Association was open, and I applied for that and got it. And that's how I got into the real estate side of things. So the passion was I really enjoyed working with membership groups and organizations. And then the passion for real estate and housing came through that job with PTAA. And what I realized, and at the time, just coincidentally, you and I were talking about it in the kind of the
green room
a little bit earlier.
The green room.
In the green room. We were talking about, you're serving on the planning board in Clemens, and I served on the planning board in small town Louisville, North Carolina. And that just happened to coincide with my starting at the apartment association. And what I began to realize was how critical housing was we all know how fundamental housing is. It's one of the primary, shelter is one of the primary needs for any person. Sure. And then I began to see how complicated and challenging the housing sector can be. And that's where the passion for that part of it comes from. So it's working with groups is a passion, working with people, and then the housing sector came along as a nice add-on. Nice.
Good deal. Teddy?
And John, you and I met years ago, probably about the time you started working with the Apartment Association. And if I remember right, you live in Louisville, but you work in Greensboro, so you drive through Winston every day for the most part.
Right. And I live in, just to be clear, I live in Winston now. We downsized when the kids started going off to school. We downsized a little too much, and then had to buy another house after that. Yeah. But we are in Winston, right down off of Burke Mill Road.
Okay, actually. Cool. And I like your style of understanding your position in your family life, i.e., your marriage. For years, I've heard you refer to your wife as your better three-quarter. And your notes to me, you sent for the bio statement, you said your long-suffering wife of 30 years. So
yeah, I
can relate, buddy. Absolutely.
Yep.
So let's go back to TREBIC a little bit more. Tell me a little bit more in a bigger picture of what's their purpose and how does their purpose impact us as humans in the triad?
Sure. So there's a delicate balance between the real estate industry is a highly regulated industry, and the land development is highly regulated. And if you're not in the business and if you don't spend any time with folks that do this kind of work, you have no way of knowing exactly how complicated it is. And so we really act as the interface between the industry and government bodies, whether they're regulatory or elected. So that's everybody from city council down to planning board, down to staff. And what we try to do is do that through stakeholder meetings and having ongoing conversations with especially staff, particularly staff, because they're the ones who are really implementing, people in the planning department, people in inspections, they're the ones who are implementing the policies that are set by the governing bodies, right? So, what we try to do is have quarterly meetings with, the city of Greensboro, the city of High Point, Guilford County, and have regular discussions, regular dialogue about, what are the challenges they're seeing, what are the challenges our people are seeing, and how can we, if whatever they might be, how can we work collaboratively to fix them? So it's less about confrontation and more about we're not always going to agree on everything, but it's more about finding that middle ground and finding the avenue to success for everybody.
Yeah. Collaboration to get to the end result where we have the homes we need, we have the real estate we need, and people who are providing those resources to us are benefiting enough to where they want to keep doing it.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, it's got to be a bit of a balance, because there's land is a finite property. There's only so much land to go around, and how you divide it up and how many people per whatever square footage. And I get involved a little bit with land usage as I put my toe in the water. So I'm learning as I go. And John, I'm going to be taking some notes here. So
sure.
So I'll be on my toes. Good deal. Yeah,
So,
if you have comments, by the way, or questions, and Dean, I'm not sure I really still understand what the question is, so maybe Teddy does, but anyway, we'll try to work some of those in, but I know we have a lot of good topics, but if you do have comments or questions, please put them in the chat area and I'll try to work them in where I can.
Yeah. So the Great Recession plays a huge role in everything that's going on in our life, in our communities, et cetera, et cetera. Talk a little bit about what has the Great Recession, which we can all define in lots of different ways, but bottom line, it means people ain't wanting to do with the jobs that people want us to do. They want to change. How's that impacted the housing?
It had a severe impact. So for when you think about what was going on in the lead up to the Great Recession, you had what a lot of people call a frothy or an overheated housing market, and it was primarily because we had a better balance of supply and demand, but you had a lot of people who were getting loans that maybe they couldn't afford long term. You had a lot of people that were they were kind of house rich, but otherwise they were in precarious financial positions. But you still had what you really had going on was a normal home construction market. The Great Recession hits, and you can look at any chart related to home construction, and you look at 2009, 2010, and it is a cliff. It is the rate of construction went off the cliff. So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but let's say, for argument's sake, that in the Triad, it was normal for 5,000 homes to be built in a year. After the recession, that was more like 400 or 500 total for a year. So it truly fell off a cliff. Well, that would have been fine if our population shrank or if our population froze in place, but our population continued to grow. The Triad is and Triad. I'm going to talk a lot about the Triad, but this is true nationwide too.
Sure.
So with construction down, with population continuing to grow, even if it only grew at 5% over 10 years or whatever it might be, that's thousands of homes that weren't built, that needed to be built to keep up with population growth. So over time, we knew we had a housing shortage 10 years ago. And it's only gotten worse every passing year. It was only in the last couple of years that our housing construction rate got back up to anywhere close to the rate that it was back in 05, 06.
I got to ask you then. So I'm trying to follow along here. So I know the world kind of crashed in 08, 09. And you had it was a bloodbath for job hunters and the economy and the stock market and everything else. I knew some builders that got stuck, that they'd been building homes and now they got these big old nice homes and ain't nobody buying them. All right. So I get that. So I guess my question is, if the population continued to grow, would a smart builder have said, I'm not going to build the higher end homes when everybody was gobbling them up. I'm going to build more moderate homes. Why did people stop building homes if the population kept growing? People have to live somewhere. I guess that's what I'm wondering is, They weren't buying homes, but yet they had to live somewhere if the population grows. So why weren't homes being built even on the lower end of the cost scale around 09, 10?
So, I mean, the reality was that a lot of builders went out of business. They became much more conservative.
Yeah.
Their labor went away, went to other markets. So they repositioned themselves. So one of the challenges for the Triad in particular is we are sandwiched between Charlotte and Raleigh, which I don't know if you remember when NAFTA was signed, and I forget was it Ross Perot who said that great sucking sound you hear is all the jobs going to South America or Mexico or wherever.
Yeah.
That was a
What
quote,
we had
not
in-
necessarily a reality.
Not a real, no, I'm just saying, but what we had was that great sucking sound of our construction labor going to other markets like Raleigh, Charlotte.
Yeah.
And the building, and they, I've worked for many years with the apartment association. There are a ton of apartment builders headquartered in the Triad who have not built a thing in the Triad in years because they had better opportunities in Nashville. They had better opportunities in Raleigh and Charlotte and Charleston and other places. So we really, you did have some inventory that was left over from the recession, but the reality was from a risk basis, it made more sense for them to build in a higher income area where the returns on the construction were going to be greater than it would be to build here locally. Yeah. It's not that we haven't had any building, we just haven't had enough building, to keep up with the population growth. And
in Winston, I see all these, downtown growth, condo growth, apartment growth, even out here in Advance where I live. The growth out here is significant compared to what it used to be.
Yeah.
But I hear you, we're not caught up yet.
Right. So the the National Apartment Association did a study about 5 years ago showing how many just apartments to keep up with rental demand, not overall housing, just rental demand. In the Triad, we needed about 30,000 apartments to be built between this would have been 2018, 2019, and 2030.
Oh Lordy.
And at the rate we've been now, everybody I met was like, how can people keep building all these apartments? All I see are apartments here, apartments there. Not even close to keeping up with the increased demand. And you see that in the occupancy rates. You'd be hard pressed to find an apartment community that has a lower than 96 or 97% occupancy rate.
Yeah, I did that research just in the last week, trying to find an apartment around me. Randy, mom's not kicking me out of the house, dude. Looking for a friend of mine who wants to move up here. And I was like, man, I can't find a space for you that you can afford. Yeah.
Right.
Let's talk about this picture in the context of today, in the context of two pieces, John. One is not the recession, but the resignation, people leaving jobs. What kind of impact has the great resignation that's been going on? What has that done to the housing industry? Or have you seen that?
The housing. So one of the things that I learned when I took this job. So I've been in TREBIC for about a year. And what that did is it took me from thinking about the apartment industry to thinking about the overall land development and land use industry. And one of the things that's been a little surprising to me is exactly how challenging the labor market is across the board. Yes. So if you look at land development, all right, let's look at it from the private side. You have, most people think of the construction companies. So the home builders that you see out there turning dirt and, throwing up walls and doing everything they got to do. They have a labor shortage, but so do the engineers. They have a labor shortage. They have a hard time finding surveyors. So there's a problem finding surveyors. They have a hard time finding subcontractors because they have, the average age, I haven't seen the numbers recently, but the average age of a plumber is something like 55 around here. Average age of an electrician is about the same. They don't have enough people coming into the industry. Yeah. That's on the private side. On the public side, this is one that really shocked me. Every municipality is struggling to hire. They have, I think Winston-Salem has something like a 20% vacancy rate across their entire, workforce. We're talking everything from driving trucks to inspectors to whatever it might be. That's across all departments. Right.
Yeah.
So they are struggling. So they've had, one of the things that happened over the last 3 or 4 years is we did see the construction activity go up a lot, significantly. So they have been staffed for the kind of the recession level staffing that they went through a downsizing themselves back during the recession, and they've been slowly staffing back up. But when you get hit with this massive spike in activity like we did over the last 3 or 4 years, they have a hard time keeping up with the process as well. So the impact has been, it is hard to describe exactly how ubiquitous the impact of the recession continues to be, even 10 years later, 12 years later.
Yeah.
So I've got to hop in here because I'm kind of a workforce development guy in my real job. You got the skills gap. Are we training plumbers? Are we training, the folks? Because you can't outsource that to China or India, or you can't do it. It's got to have hands-on. Another is the benefits cliff. We've got folks who can be upskilled and make more money, but in doing so, they lose their child care benefits or some of their housing benefits or some of their food benefits. And so from a financial standpoint, so this thing's a mess. It's a matrix that you can't point a finger at one area and go, if we can just fix that and slap a Band-Aid on it, we'll be fine. Because it's all over the place. There are bodies out there. So I don't know what the solution is to get them trained, but there are people out there, I think, that if they're physically able to work, we ought to be able to get them in those jobs, you would hope. Because otherwise, the problem's not going to get fixed. You're still going to have people on the sidelines driving for Uber or, Lyft or whatever. And you're still not going to have your plumbers, and you're not going to have the you're not going to have these guys. So I don't know. Do you have any glimmer of hope or any magic crystal ball or magic wand that can help us out here and save the day?
So one of the things we're also involved with workforce development, work with the Greensboro Chamber on some of their initiatives. And I will tell you, so it's competitive. We're competing. The construction industry, the land development industry is competing with manufacturers, competing with everybody else, right? So, a part of this is the State Home Builders Association they've gone out and they've built 2 trucks that can go around to school districts to help show, they're part of the workforce development initiative, where they can go and do kind of the show and tell and expose people to the trades around at different school districts. You have all the apprenticeship programs going on through the various school districts. Every school district is working on this. I think one of the positive trends that I'm seeing, and Randy, I'd love to hear your take on this, is I'm seeing a shift from, every kid's got to go to college, to it's now, it is perfectly acceptable to go into a trade, to go to a 2-year program, to go through a work study program, to go through an apprenticeship program. You don't have to go to a 4-year college necessarily. And in my day, I graduated from high school in the 80s, and back then it was go to college or nothing. They didn't push you into the trades. Or at least let you know. It's not a matter of pushing; it's letting you know that that's an alternative that's viable. Also back in our day, manufacturing was much more of a viable thing than there were many more manufacturing jobs that were available at that time. But that was kind of seen as if you can't get into college, you're going to go into manufacturing, right? Yeah. Which is bad positioning as far as I'm concerned.
True, and the back in the day, you didn't have to have the level of technology understanding to work in a factory. Right. It was much more manual labor, and you could get out of high school and have a good. Look at Reynolds Tobacco and some other ones. These guys are millionaires, right? Came out of high school, but to get that job today would require some upskilling in the technology piece. Right. And that's whole skilled manufacturing is changing versus being what I would call more of a sweatshop kind of thing into more of a high tech environment. Right. And you got to have the knowledge and the skills to pull that off. Yeah. Thankfully, the Forsyth Tech and some of the other schools are really emphasizing that now. And I know Goodwill has our hands in a lot of different buckets with skills training and such to try to take the people that want to upskill and get in these jobs to get them trained so that they can compete. But yeah, that's a tough one because it is competitive. And I remember too, military was the other option.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one of my sons went in the military. And now even the military's they're having a hard time trying to find people, and they're having to cut or lower their I'll call it standards. I don't know if that's the best word to use, but whatever it is, the bar they have to meet. What is it called?
Criteria. Change
Criteria.
the criteria.
Yeah. And the same thing with businesses now. They're bending on the degree issue. I'll take a guy that has the 15 years, 10-year, whatever, versus the guy fresh out of school that says, yeah, I think I can do this thing.
So labor is a big challenge.
Yeah.
It's not the only challenge.
No.
Okay. And by the way, one of the comments in the chat was somebody threw out, at least threw out the idea of having cruise ships as apartments. And Dale says that's ongoing. I'm like, I want to put a cruise ship in my back 40 acres. That would be pretty cool. Maybe, maybe not. So here's the other big challenge, John, that's going on in what's it called? Multi-residential properties as well as single. Supply chain. A good friend of mine built a house out here in Davie County. She told me it cost her 30% more than it was originally budgeted for because you can't buy a freaking 2x4 and you can't find a 2x6 and nobody had any nails. What's going on with the supply chain? How's that today? Is that getting better? Same? Worse?
All right. I don't know how well this is going to work, Teddy, but I'm going to throw up in front of my camera a little.
Push it closer. Oh, your fuzzy's messing with it, man.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll describe it. Yeah. So it's the National Home Builders provided a chart that shows the building materials, imports and exports, and the pandemic effects. And all I can tell you is it basically has a line, different color line. And I can send this to you afterwards if you guys want it. And it's different color lines for each country, and it shows when their shutdowns are. And then, and if you think about it, you get some supplies from China, some from Brazil, some from Europe, wherever. And typically when you have a supply chain challenge, those things are kind of together, right? There's like a wavy, all those lines would kind of follow each other. This looks like you gave your 3-year-old a bunch of crayons and said, draw, just do this. They're all over the place. Yeah. So what's happening is once the supply chain, say China comes back online. So everybody's read about China and their challenges and their lockdowns and they obviously they have a heavy impact on the supply chain, but other countries do as well. And they have all gone through their challenges at different times and they come back online at different times. So the inputs that China might, they might be an OEM or original manufacturer for certain components that go into something else that they need in Brazil. Well, by the time they get to Brazil, Brazil's shut down. They've had to shut down again or whatever. They're mismatched. And so we've seen everything from, everybody heard about lumber last year. Well, lumber's actually come back in line. It's not as bad as it was. Steel, all the commodities go up and down, and that's been a challenge. But then you have all the different components that go in. So windows, you might have to wait a year to get windows. You might have to wait, whatever the components going into a structure are.
The appliances in the kitchen, the toilets, heat and air conditioning systems. So one that a lot of people haven't heard about, Duke Energy. All the energy companies are having trouble getting transformers and electrical panels. So you can build something, but you can't power it because you're waiting on just a transformer to come in. Beautiful. It's not Duke's fault. They're dependent on their supplier. Right.
Hey, we've got just a couple minutes, Teddy, before the halfway break. John, if I can work this in real quick. So, we talk about the world economy and the global economy and all that. And back in the day, we home grew everything we needed and by and large, and we were self-sufficient. In light of all of what you just described, do you see any kind of movement toward bringing things back home so that we can control our own destiny to some degree?
I think we're seeing onshoring. I think if you look at some of the economic development announcements we've had locally, look at what Toyota's building a battery plant here because they need those batteries to be near their car manufacturing operation. We're seeing it with Foxconn building Wolfspeed building down in Chatham County. they're staying here for a reason. They're less dependent or less vulnerable to the supply chain. So I do think we're seeing that how across the various industries. I think it's kind of hit or miss who's doing what, but I think it's a trend you're going to continue to see, and I think we're going to become much more regional. I think we're going to see more in Mexico, more in Canada, and just reducing that supply chain span. I think will benefit a lot of people.
Yeah. And no matter what we do, we will always, I don't ever see us being totally independent, because there's so many different components that make up so much of our lives. Yeah. So, hey, let's do, you're on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy. Our special guest today is my friend, Mr. Jon Lowder. Lunch Conversations through the rest of 2022 is sponsored by the Elder Law Firm. Who's important to you and what you plan to do to honor your responsibilities for them? This would be that generation older than you, the folks that need to have estate planning, need to have elder care planning, need those 7 documents that are so critical for us as we transition into our older years. These folks are also important to the Elder Law Firm. They're in Greensboro, North Carolina. The website is elderlawfirm.com. Their phone number is 336-396-4551. You need to call them and you need to thank them for being a sponsor of the show and have a conversation with them about what's important to you in your life and your family. So we appreciate the Elder Law Firm helping us out this year. And by the way, in the context of that, we are looking for that next great sponsor of this show. If you know that human, introduce Randy or I to that human for a conversation. Randy, can I say that on the show?
You just did. I'm good with it. You're going to bleep it out? It's too late now.
I'll bleep nothing out, man. We have never had to bleep out anything, have we?
We have not yet.
Yes.
We got Lowder here, so you got to keep an eye on this guy. Hey, if you have comments or questions for Jon, put them in the chat. I see several in here. One of them, if I might just, Don had mentioned, back. The houses kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because I assume people wanted bigger and bigger, just like cars. Yeah. And now you see these big, McMansions that are hardly being used. So I guess part of the comment I wonder then is, okay, are we as builders saying, okay, we need to build homes closer on smaller lots? Even if the homes are smaller, the smaller lots make them affordable and you can put more houses in a smaller area. So you can still make your profit versus maybe one big house on a larger plot of land. Right. It's not apples to apples, but you see where I'm going with that? Can they condense the population a little bit more?
Sure. So it's really the yield.
And Jon, talk about that article that touch on that a little bit about what you shared earlier today.
Yeah, so you have a couple of things going on. Land cost is a significant factor in the cost of the home, in the final cost of the home. So when you live when you're in an area that is more densely populated, you're going to have that land is going to be more per square foot. That's going to cost you more to acquire that land. Yeah. So even here in the Triad, the closer you get to any downtown, the more you're going to pay. It's a location. The more you're going to pay for every square foot of that land. So the more that you can do with that land, you're going to reduce the impact that the cost of the land has on the final product. So if you can put 4 smaller homes on an acre, then you're going to get more yield out of that acre than you are a single home on that acre, right? You're going to you don't have to price each home as much to get the yield that you need to make the project viable, right? To get the loan to do the project. So that's why as you get closer to a city, you begin to notice that the density of the housing tends to be higher and higher, because that's the only way to make a project work, unless you're only going to build for extremely high income people. And that market is limited. There's just only so many people that can afford that. As you get further out, that's why you start to see larger lots and larger homes. What you're paying, nothing in life is free. What you pay there are your commuting costs, right? If you have to go to work, if you have to get downtown, if you have to go to any of the amenities, the farther away you are from them, the more you're going to pay in gas and your time. I think I mentioned I grew up in Northern Virginia. There was a time when I was working in downtown DC and living about 25, 30 miles outside the city. And my commute each way was about an hour and a half. So I had a lovely home in a great neighborhood that we loved, but my cost was 3 hours a day, 2 to 3 hours a day, getting to and from work. And this is in the 90s. So remote was not an option. I had to go, right? I had to get there. And that's where the job was. So, that's kind of the idea behind density is the more you can do, the more you can reduce how much that land cost impacts the final product, the more affordable you can make that final product.
Well, Teddy he hops in his private helicopter. He's got a chauffeur or whatever you call pilot, I guess, on
Personal
call,
pilot.
personal pilot, and just helicopters in wherever he needs to drop. He actually
Flies
parachutes.
right over all the rest of
He
us.
parachutes right down to where he needs to be. So
I used to do that, Randy, but the insurance was higher when I parachuted. So now we have to have a helipad on the building.
Hey, here's one for you and this, I guess, to kind of jump in. Sorry here, Teddy, but it deals with not in my backyard. It ain't happening.
Now that's called NIMBYism.
NIMBYism.
Yeah, I heard that.
We'll
So
try to touch on that.
we don't want these people moving in. We don't want that kind of clientele here. We don't want this. Now, legally, that you can't say that.
Right.
And I'm on a planning board. You can't make decisions based on that.
Right.
Legally, you can't do it.
Right.
But people are people. And, do you want the city dump in your backyard, or do you want some loud airport next door to you? Not in my backyard. I don't want it. And those are real people with real feelings. So it's a balance. And I wonder how you address that, because it sounds like part of the answer to this thing is maybe smaller lots, smaller homes, keep the cost down a little bit. Builders still get their return. How is that working out with people who are already there with some of those larger homes, like the mansion that Teddy has? I mean, how do you deal with guys like Teddy? He can be a real bear.
So NIMBYism is a real thing.
Yeah, it is.
I also have a chart here that shows how much it contributes to the cost and the time of a project. The home builders and the apartment folks got together, because I can tell you from my personal experience as an apartment, representing the apartment industry, you want to get neighbors out fighting something, just put the word apartment. You could build a house and call it an apartment, and you will have people show up at a planning board meeting saying, we don't want that near us because it will do the following things to our property. But the confronting NIMBYism part, the study that the builders and the apartment folks did shows that it adds about 5 or 6% to the development costs, and it adds about 7.5 months to the completion time for a project, which is
what does the delay in the planning board acting and the council acting and the delays?
You have to have public meeting, you have to meet with it. So the first thing you do, and the first thing that most builders and developers do, is they have to meet with the surrounding neighbors. Because what will happen is the town or city or county will send notice to whatever their ordinance says, within a certain radius of the project, they have to get a mailer informing them that this is going to happen. So that's the first thing that happens. Starts there. Then they have usually a good developer, if they're smart, they will meet with the neighbors proactively. They talk to them. They kind of go through what they're proposing, what they think it's, here's where we're going to put the driveway into the neighborhood. Here's the entrance. Here's how many houses we're going to have. This is what it's going to look like. Then it goes to planning board. It goes to the town. First it goes to, you have to go through the whole process with the planning department, with inspections, with environmental review. There's a million steps. And then you get to planning. By the time it gets to planning board, it's gone through all these steps. So that's you're already months and hundreds of thousands of dollars in. Then it gets through the planning board. If it gets approved, then it has to go to council, and they have to approve it, because if you're looking at a rezoning, all of these things add up to literally years and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So that gets included into the cost of that final housing product. So the whole idea of density is I get where people come from. I am a homeowner, right? I happen to live in a more urban neighborhood, so it doesn't really freak me out when somebody says, "Hey, we're thinking about putting apartments down the road," right? We have them already. But if you're
Sure.
living in a place like Clemens or Louisville and you're in a subdivision and you've had farms around you this whole time, and now somebody's going to come in and they're going to either build a 500 home subdivision or a 250 home on half the acreage apartment community, your first thoughts are, what's it going to do to the school? If my kids are in schools, what's it going to do to traffic?
Safety.
What's it going to do to the ambiance of our neighborhood? What's it going to do to our standard of living? Buried in there, in a lot of cases, this is especially true when you get into more of the apartment world. There is a certain fear of renters. There's a certain assumption that renters, and I'm not even going to get into the whole demographics thing, because a lot of these apartment communities, when they're built, they're paying more in rent than everybody around them is paying in a mortgage. I guarantee you, because these apartment communities are they're not building them cheap. They have amenities out the wazoo. A 1-bedroom is going to go for $1,200, $1,000 a month, right? So it's not an income thing, but it's the renters aren't invested in the community attitude. Renters, there's a real bias against renting. So that's a challenge from the NIMBY perspective as well. Mm-hmm. So it's pressure on there are some legitimate concerns about what will this do to my neighborhood. Everybody worries about that. But you have to turn it on its head too. The person who owns that property and is looking to do something with it, if you deny them the right to use the property in the way that is, that best serves their purposes, you're also impinging on their rights. So they have property rights as well. So you have to balance those things, right?
Yeah.
You really have to look at them. So if there was a case in Louisville, I felt so bad for this woman. She had a home and an empty lot next to her, and the empty lot was going to be her retirement, and then her septic field failed, and so she had nowhere on her lot that she was on that they could put a new septic field. Had to go to her second lot, so she now could not sell it because she needed it for her septic field, and thus her retirement income was gone. That's a micro scale of what can happen to people who, if they owned a farm, it might be a family farm, and they're looking for the best available out, right? Because it's an asset that's been in their family forever, and now they have to sell it to make do. And if you deny them the ability to sell it to a developer, that's an issue we have to address. So that's just one case. In a more suburban, urban area, you have to look at the infrastructure. You have to look at, everybody has to do it. If they're going to do a development, they have to do a traffic impact study.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the real issue comes in when the data comes in and it shows that the traffic can easily be handled. When it shows there's not going to be a negative impact overall, that's when the real motives begin to reveal themselves. It's really about protecting what, my space, and I just don't like it. And there's no viable reason for it. I just don't like it. And that's when we start to have real problems working out negotiating it.
Randy's really good with that phrase. I don't like it. He's got that phrase, get off my front yard, nailed.
Hey, turn that music down.
All right. I told you, John, what would happen is that we would put together some ideas of things to talk about, and we would just get knee deep into something.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's
hey,
fine.
let's talk about a couple of ideas come up in chat that, I want to talk about. My tiny homes.
Yep.
Are tiny homes a thing for us? Yes, or in our area or not?
There's some pockets of them. Generally, there's a nonprofit here in Greensboro called Tiny Homes. They're taking the approach as they're addressing the affordability issue with tiny homes, and that's where I've seen most of it. Most of the action is in that affordability side. I take the attitude that when it comes to housing, it's a yes and. It's not a, tiny homes, is it a silver bullet? Absolutely not. I can make all kinds of arguments for why I wouldn't do a tiny home, and I can make all sorts of arguments why I would. What we need is all types of housing to meet the various needs of every citizen in the region. So apartments work for some people, not for others. Tiny homes work for some people, not for others. Townhomes work for some and not for others.
Right.
So where we get, Randy, you had mentioned earlier, I don't want an airport to come in next to me. When it comes to zoning, that's or a landfill, right, or a mine, or things like that.
Mhm.
Those are a little easy, quite frankly, they're easier conversations to have because those are massive uses and you're really getting into industrial versus housing. Most cities at this point, especially around here, they kind of established their industrial zones and their housing zones.
Mhm.
So the real rub comes when you're talking about converting, like we have all these single family quarter acre, zoned areas. And that's an opportunity for density. So what if we were to rezone them so that they would allow for duplexes, for instance, or for different types of use? So you could come in and you could do some single family quarter acre, some maybe even apartments, but some townhomes, some, pocket homes, these little 800 square foot homes that serve a specific need. And we just have, I think my attitude is we have to be open to all of those things. And to me, that's the opportunity for us to add the density, is to look at some of those single family zoned areas. And we're not talking about high density, we're talking about moderate density or multi types of density. I think it would best serve us to start looking at that's kind of the low hanging fruit.
The 200 home, I gotta remember which way I'm sitting, the 200 home development that's being built behind me will have 1,150 square feet to 3,500 square feet single family homes.
Right.
That's that, and they're trying to get to me because I want a smaller place, and they're trying to get to somebody else who's raising a family that wants a bigger place. Yeah.
Right.
So, all right, here's the other one. The other one that came up was Lisa's worried about legalizing marijuana and how that's going to impact her real estate. And I'm joking with you, Lisa, but maybe you need lots of land to grow marijuana, and that's expensive. I don't know. Or maybe it's because that's a labor issue. I'm not sure. But the other one that came up, oh crap, it went away. Was it went away.
Had to deal with one of them had to deal with like in the Colorado and the ski slopes. They can't find workers because one thing is you got proximity to the workplace. So if we can get affordable housing, but it's way over here, and the jobs are, where's my hand? Over here, you got a problem. And so back in the day, you'd have the company homes. What was that? What's that song? You load
I owe my soul
tons
to the company
store. Yeah, big, yeah. So are we maybe looking at that where you've got a row of factory homes lined up beside a big company where they run them all together and provide affordable housing that way?
Randy, for John, that may align with this trend of corporations buying up homes. So there's something going on in the real estate exploitation that we haven't seen big yet in that context of the communities building homes and corporations owning millions of homes.
So, all right, so you unpack a couple of things there. First of all, you see places like, so out in California, I believe it's Facebook or Apple, they started running shuttles. Like they would have shuttles that would run to various neighborhoods where they had a high density of their employees living there.
Right.
Again, going back to your point, going back to the old days, I mean, here in Winston-Salem off of Stratford Road, if you look at the homes that were built for the Haynes plant, you had a whole village of people that lived in a community that worked at a plant. I mean, I haven't seen a trend for that, but I mean, that could be an amenity if you're trying to attract employees and you can provide them with housing and guarantee them housing at a certain cost. That's no different than health insurance as an amenity, right? So that could happen. Teddy, what you're alluding to is the single family built for rent, which is a trend. You also have companies that are building up like American Homes for Rent that are buying up homes and then turning them around and turning them into rentals. That is, believe it or not, it's very visible and it is a thing. There are thousands of homes in the Triad that are owned by corporations that are rentals. There's a whole community of homes that was purchased by one of these companies off of Peace Haven Road, across from an apartment community, right by the 421. So Peace Haven and 421. They bought the whole community and they turned it into rentals. So And there are companies now, and some of them are apartment companies who are also developing single family communities, smaller homes that they rent out, and they manage them from their apartment office. So, that is a trend. It is a vast minority of the rental market.
Yeah.
The majority of the rental market is still mom and pop owners. They own 2, 3, 4, 5 homes that they rent out.
Yeah. But it's interesting to see that growth, because it is absolutely a growing business segment. If it's going to become
Wall Street has money they need to put somewhere to work, and that's what's going on. Yeah.
I get it. So this, John, I told you, man, this would be a good conversation. And I told our audience, at one point we had almost 17,000 people on here.
Wow.
That we bring in smart people. And so, John, I absolutely appreciate you coming in and sharing with us. And we haven't even touched on this. We just bumped into it. There's a whole lot more that we could be chatting about. And let's see, give me, John, 1 or 2 points that if our audience didn't hear anything else that you said, what's 1 or 2 points that you think that we need to pay attention to in regards to our entire housing market?
Sure. So the reason I came up with your 40-year-old might be living with you. I'm most worried for my children are all 30, in their late 20s, early 30s. And I'm most worried for them being able to buy that first home. That first home is the big, we've all been down that road. That's one that you have to scrape and starve yourself and because you're paying rent and trying to save to get that first home. You have no equity in anything. So I'm worried that if we don't fix the supply issue, that our children there's not going to be enough supply for them to be able to affordably buy that first home. Yeah. And again, I've represented the rental industry for years and years. Renting is not only is it acceptable, it can be preferable in many situations. But home ownership is the kind of the traditional way to build wealth, not just income, but wealth. So I'm really, really worried we need to get our supply up to meet the demand that we have coming. And the other is for people to be open-minded to every solution that comes along, because this is not a silver bullet situation. There's no one thing that we can do to fix this. We have to do a lot of different things. And pay attention to people don't realize how much is done at the local level. Everybody pays attention. Come election time, everybody pays attention to the president and Congress and maybe their state representatives. But pay attention to local elections, because that's where the work is done, and that's where the vast majority of work related to real estate is done.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, there was a comment, by the way, Lisa put in about rent to own, and I had a conversation with a realtor about that a while back, and what's the incentive for the seller to do that when the houses are going like hotcakes? There is none, unless they hope you default on it and they can turn around and rent to own to somebody else. But yeah, if I can get cash money for my house, I'm going to do it. And I get that a lot these days. You see people paying cash, maybe not as much now as you did, 2 months ago, but it's still a pretty robust market.
Yeah,
it is.
It really is. It really is. John, thank you. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks a lot, man. Really appreciate
thanks for having me.
Joining us today. Randy, do you have a quick story?
I always make one up. I hadn't really thought about it a whole lot, but I remember our first house it cost $50,000.
Yeah.
And this is back in the 19 somethings, I think in 1980, late 80s or something like that. And I thought, oh my goodness, $50,000. How are we going to swing this and the mortgage? And now $50,000 won't even buy a car in some cases. So, I mean, things are only going to go one way. They're going up. And you almost look at it like an escalator, and that, it due to life circumstances and, decisions made, whatever. I am in an apartment, but, even though I could probably swing a condo, I don't know that I want the burden of that. At my age, do I want to take on a mortgage and whatever? It's a nice, safe, quiet community. I have no issues with repairs or yard work or anything else. And I get to hang out with Teddy more. I can spend more time with Teddy. And so, I mean, there's no downside, but it's not for everybody.
No,
and that's one thing I took away from you today, that it is not a one size fits all. It's not us against them or those people or those developers. They want to come in and whatever. there are always a couple, 3, 4, 5 different sides to a story, and everybody has different interests. And so trying to take all that into account and be, I don't know if equitable is the right word, but be fair, and that is a balancing act.
Yeah.
And and I'm on the planning board for Clemens, and I have a very limited knowledge in land use from a career standpoint, but I'm learning a lot, and there are a lot of complexities. So I can only imagine some of the challenges that you and your team would face trying to work through some of the legislative stuff and the advocacy things that you do, because you've got competing interests at every step of the way.
That's right.
And anyway, again, thank you, John, for coming on, trying to sort some of this stuff out. What does Randy living in?
Dean wants to know if you live in a singles palace.
A singles palace.
We're not allowed to talk about that, Randy.
It's the hipster. I have a hipster. What is it called? The hipster man cave. I don't know what it's called, Teddy. I used to call it the east wing of the wooden mansion.
Yeah.
Is that what we used to call it?
I remember some conversation like that. Hey,
Anyway,
here's
you,
my
John.
quick little story, dude. And John, you were right. When I bought my first home, I had to take a second mortgage out to be able to do the down payment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'll never forget, I think I paid a total, if I remember right, it was $300 for the mortgage and $233 for a 10-year second. $533 mortgage, dude.
Yeah.
On an 1,100 square foot, 4-box bedroom townhome.
Yeah.
Now, it was 1979 that I bought that. My first big boy home that I called it was I built a 3,000 square foot home on three acres in rural Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of those sweat equity homes that I put my own labor in. Well, when I went to settlement, I expected to hand him a check for this much money. The moments before going to settlement, he told me I needed $5,000 more. I did not have anywhere near $5,000 more. But when I didn't have to have that, my bottom line, when I left settlement, my wife and I, total assets besides the brand new home, we had $0 in, a little bit of down payment. I had $53 in my checking account, and I had 4 daughters. And those, John, I would wager Randy and a lot of our audience would say were the good old days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, dude, thanks a lot. I appreciate you being here. Hey, next week, we have another John. We have John Hyman coming on. John is a labor attorney. So for our audience, this will be an interesting conversation. John's going to come in. He's out of Ohio. He's going to come in and have a conversation. And here's the title: What does the business community need to know about the current rise in union organizing? It is a trend that's starting back up. It's not going to stop. It's going to impact us all in lots of different ways. And John's going to come and share some of his insights on that from a labor attorney's perspective. So appreciate everybody being on here. Appreciate our audience. Appreciate our sponsor, the Elder Law Firm, sponsoring us through the rest of this year. Again, if you know a community sponsor that would be interested in this show, please introduce Randy or I to that human being. Again, John, appreciate you, buddy. Thanks for being on here. Randy, go off and have a great afternoon, and we'll see everybody next week. Take care.
All right. Have a good day. See you guys.
See you guys.
Yeah.